Good morning, welcome back. Okay, it's so wonderful to be learning together. First, I want to take a moment to thank our parents, Yom, Annie and Chaim Bernstein. Today is Chaim's mother's yahrzeit, Mrs. Lillian Bernstein, Niba Bas Avraham. Where's Chaim? Oh, Chaim, there we are. And Shama should have an aliyah. Let's begin our learning. So we're back to questions about why. There's so many questions about why. When you look at the Shabbos experience, what is going on with Shabbos? Try to imagine yourself in a bystander position and try to understand the Sabbath of the Jews. It is so complex. There's so many things that are going on. Let's start at the very beginning. I'll try to figure it out. And so let's start at the beginning. Why is it that Jewish women light the candles? Why do they light candles? So the truth is actually, it's not particularly a mitzvah upon women, it's actually a mitzvah on the house. Every house needs to have lights in it. And there's three reasons why we need to have a light. One reason is because of what's called Kavod Shabbos. Kavod Shabbos means you're honoring the Shabbos before Shabbos by setting it up in a beautiful way. Another reason is Oneg Shabbos. You're going to enjoy Shabbos when there's light. And the third reason is Shalom Bayis. Shalom Bayis. Let me explain this. The way I like to explain it is, what is the definition of the shin bone? It is an instrument used by human beings to find their way in the dark. Okay. I need to explain that, sorry. Okay. So when we have light that allows us not to bump into things, allows us not to get frustrated about life, and therefore creates the context of Shalom Bayis. Today we don't think about it because we have so much light. That wasn't always the case. In fact, for most of history, up till about 100 years ago, that wasn't the case. And therefore, having light in the house is really important. It happens to be that generally it is seen as the mitzvah for women, because usually on a Friday afternoon, the husband is running off at the most crucial of times to go to mincha, and the wife therefore is the akeres abayis who's going to make sure that everything happens, right? Because if it wasn't that, I don't know where I would be personally without my wife organizing everything. So it is generally this is one of the special mitzvahs that women take care of. But it is also worthwhile noting that let's say you have a man who lives alone. So a man who lives alone also lights Shabbos candles. If the wife is traveling, the husband would light the Shabbos candles because the house needs to have light. Now, you may say, wait a second, but if it's all about light, then we already have light today. We have LED, forget halogen. We've got LED. We're in the middle of replacing all the halogens in our shul with LED right now. You'll see spot by spot it's getting brighter and cheaper. So why do we need candles? And the truth is, you may be actually correct. In fact, so much so that when you light the Shabbos candles, it might be a good idea, some suggest, to switch off the lights in the central area of your house, switch them on, light the candles and say the bracha, so that your bracha is going on the light you've created in the house. Because it is actually included in this. So similarly, if you are caught, let's say, in a hospital over Shabbos, and they're not going to let you light a candle near the oxygen tank, they will ask you to leave the hospital. So what do you do about the Shabbos candles? So you switch off all the lights in the room, and then you switch on the ones you're going to keep using on Shabbos, whether that's the bathroom light or the side lamp for the bed, and you say the bracha because you've created enough light to warrant a bracha. It's not about fire, it's actually about light. But we still keep the tradition of doing fire, but we try to include in that also the light as well. So let's stop here for a moment. Welcome back to Ed. Refuah Shlema. It's wonderful to have you. And another thing is Tzeiskon Shalom to Rosemary. Rosemary's heading to Israel for a little bit this coming Thursday. We're going to miss you. So anyway, just a few notes just around the room. Okay, so now what's this thing about women covering their eyes? They're waving their hands, and they're placing their hands in front of their eyes. So it goes back to, when should the bracha be? So generally speaking, when you do a mitzvah, you say a bracha. When do you say the bracha in relationship to that mitzvah? Always before. Right, so before I turn around the esrog, I say the bracha. Then I turn around the esrog. Before we blow the shofar, before we continue to eat in the sukkah, we say the leishet. These are the brachas we say, really generally speaking, before. However, when it comes to the light of Shabbos, it's a little more complicated, because if a woman is going to take in Shabbos by saying the bracha, and she says the bracha beforehand, then on Shabbos you're not allowed to light candles. So by saying the bracha, you've now precluded yourself from doing the mitzvah, which you said the bracha on, which is a little bit of a circle. So what do you do? So there's a few ways, there's a few suggestions as to this. There's maybe wait to take out Shabbos later. But the default is you do it on a special recitation of a special recitation. But the other option, which is the predominantly accepted explanation, is you light first, but you don't get benefit from the light yet. Meaning you block out the light, literally, and then say the bracha upon revealing the light. Because at that point in time, you're now taking in Shabbos once the candles are lit. But at the same time, blocking out the usage of them from you personally, which is why the bracha is said afterwards. Therefore, you may say, technically speaking, if that's true on Yom Tov, maybe it could be the other way around. Because on Yom Tov, you are allowed to light candles, right? You're not allowed to light a match. You're allowed to transfer from the Yortzai candle to the candles. So technically speaking, you should be able to say the bracha then beforehand. The answer is yes. But it's suggested, generally speaking, suggested not to do that way, just because we're human beings. And human beings just keep doing the things we keep doing. So if let's say you go through Tishrei and there's Yom Tovs, Rosh Hashanah 2 times, Sukkot 2 times, Shmini Atzeres. By the time you get to the last Shabbos in October, you're going to start saying the bracha beforehand, and it's going to be for Shabbos then. So generally speaking, it's what's called loy plug. Loy plug means to say is, no, we don't make things too complicated because we as human beings get into our groove and we carry on doing what we do. So that's right. But that's technically speaking will be the case when it comes to Shabbos. So when the waving of the hands is really to cover the eyes so that the one does not benefit from the candles specifically until after the bracha as well. Why do some people have so many candles? Some people have,
Wasn't there something that the husband should set up the lights?
Yes, the husband should absolutely be involved in this as well. The Gemara talks about this. Is that the husband needs to be very involved in preparing for Shabbos. So it's not an outsourcing here. And so one of the examples that's given is pre-lighting the candles. Actually, I set up the candles, but pre-lighting the candles because a lot of candles are hard to light, as an example. But yes, it's a mitzvah upon the house to be done. Now, what numbers of candles? You look at some people, they've got lots of candles, some people less candles, guests have 2. Like, what's the deal? Why is it like this? The answer is you're supposed to have 2 Shabbos candles. 1 candle is because of Zachar, and 1 candle is because of Shamar. Right? So it's supposed to be kept, which means that's positive and negative. Zachar is you're supposed to remember Shabbos, do it. Shamar is you're supposed to not do it, right? So you're supposed to have 2 candles. That's the basic framework. The Shulchan Aruch then says, but it's better to have lots of light, because lots of light means a very pleasant environment. We've accomplished that, generally speaking, with lots of light in our houses, right? So that is part of that. But there is a practice which seems to be very popular today, which is that upon every additional kid, then a parent will light 1 extra candle, right? So generally approximates to the size of the family, because there'll be 2, which is actually Zachar and Shamar. It's not a husband and wife, but it's Zachar and Shamar. And then each of the kids there afterwards. That is, you don't find that actually in Shulchan Aruch. It seems to be a more recent practice, which is a beautiful practice. It could be, like tongue-in-cheek, it could be that there is a reason to light an extra candle every Shabbos, and that is if you forget. So if a person forgets to light Shabbos candles, and then there's what's called a penalty, which is imposed, that a person will, for the rest of their life, will light an extra candle. This is one of the messages I always send to chasans and kalas the first Shabbos they get married. I'm like, you should remember to bring your talis to shul, and you should remember to light candles, because the first Shabbos, the Shev Rachos, they're rushing, and they're staying in this apartment, and it's the easiest time to forget, and you don't want to forget. You don't want to have 3 candles the rest of your life. But maybe it could be that when every child's born, that first Shabbos is the easiest time to forget. So there's going to be an extra candle, but I don't think that's the actual reason. But it's a beautiful practice. When a person goes as a guest to somebody else's house, or when he's staying out, generally we revert back to the basic, which is the bare bones, which is 2. Which is why when you set up for guests who are staying by you, you put out 2 candles, because that's the Zachar and Shamar. Yossi? Michael? Good. Steve?
Does it put in the extra candle penalty? Does that make a tikkun in your opponent?
No. Generally, penalties are generally things that it's like speeding ticket. I don't know. Again, I always say it's a bad example, but it's like, it's like, is the reason for speeding tickets to create funds for the state, or is it that people don't speed? The point is that, so you may say today, well, it's part of the budget, right? But initially, the point wasn't to get money. The point was that people shouldn't speed. The point of this, it seems to me, is a deterrence, meaning it's a pretty high bar. That's a really big penalty. That's for the rest of your days, right? So to avoid that, then I think it's an avoidance, which is why people take it very seriously. Okay. Yes, Rosemary.
You didn't forget, but you're driving home from the doctor somewhere in Manhattan, and there's a blizzard, and he said, you must take that antibiotic tonight. And you have to stop the drugstore and pass the time. And it's not like you forgot, but you just...
Yeah, so this
is totally impossible.
So I'll frame the question the way it's recently got it. Is somebody who has a terrifying illness has a procedure on a Friday afternoon in the city, and they're in such a frail state that if they were to stay in the city, it would not be good for them. So how do they get back? So they could not allow to drive. You're not allowed to drive back you're not allowed to drive a car on Shabbos. That's an Issur D'Oraisa. But you can ask a non-Jew if a person is a Chodesh Yesh Bos Takana, certainly in this case to ask a non-Jew, which means you can ask a non-Jewish taxi ride. If you're going to get in the car and you drive back, and if you get back in the car, you get in the car on the way back, and you realize there's not enough time, you shouldn't get in the car. You should get a taxi to start. And so you get in the car and you ask a taxi to take you home. In such a situation that you may arrive after the time of Shabbos comes in, so you ask somebody else to switch on the lights or light your candles for you, because that's the only way you need to have your house taken care of.
There's nobody else in the house.
Okay, let's deal with the specific questions after. This is the why, not the what question here. Okay, so let me hang on. Let me. Yeah. Is this a why question? This is a what question?
Young girls lighting candles with their mother.
Okay, so a good question. So generally speaking, usually young women in the house will rely on their mothers. Generally speaking, okay, when they go out and they get an apartment and so on, they have a responsibility to themselves. But that's because it's based on the house more than the specific person. Not like Hanukkah as an example. Okay. Let's go into the next stage. So people come back from shul. Everybody sits down and they sing Shalom Aleichem. Right? Why do we sing Shalom Aleichem? Like, why is this a universal practice? And so the reason is based actually on the Gemara. The Gemara tells us, very beautiful Gemara, that on Friday night a person is escorted by two angels, and the one is a positive angel, one is a negative angel. When they come to the house, then they examine, sort of the state of affairs in the house. Are the beds set? Is the table laid? And the candles lit, basically. Which, by the way, means to say is that, like, this is not a husband-wife thing. This is like, dude, if it's not working, figure it out. Like, do something, right? Like, it's like this is not. There's no blame here. You've got to figure things out. Like, it's a team. It's teamwork. Somebody, this. However, this is going to work. Let's get it done, right? So, in the end of the day, if the house is in disarray, right, then the negative angel says, it may be this way, that it should be like this the next Shabbos, and the good angel has to say Amen. And then if it's the other way around, the good angel says may be like this for the future Shabbos, and the negative angel says Amen. Right? By the way, notice that they're not cursing or blessing anybody; they're just allowing what you do to continue. Right? Which is generally how habits work. Right? Like, if the house is going to look like in a great place one Shabbos, is probably going to be the case most, and if vice versa, it's probably going to be like that most. Right? But be it as it may, so Shalom Aleichem is actually directed to those angels. The angels are coming to visit us, so we welcome them in. And we say, Shalom Aleichem, welcome in. Bo'achem b'shalom, come in peace. Baruchuni, that's the bless us in peace. And Seis Shalom is always a bit of a complicated verse. It's like, bye now, let me show you the door. So that's always a little bit of a complicated verse. Some people say that that's actually escorting the angels of the week. Kind of like when Yaakov Avinu moved from the land of Israel to the Chutz La'aretz, there's the angels going up and down. When he came back at the end of Vayetze, they came back. So it's not like that. It's like that in place and time. So when I leave the weekday and I enter the Shabbos, there's a switch of angels. And that's the Bo'achem l'shalom and Seischem l'shalom, which is going on there. And that's what we said. Why do we say it 3 times? And that's to emphasize that some people have the practice of only doing it once. But be it as it may, generally speaking, one does it 3 times. And that's for emphasis. That one's really asking these angels to bless one. If there's some sticklers who don't say Shalom Aleichem, and that's because they don't believe you should be speaking to angels to ask for blessings, only to God. But nonetheless, it seems to be the predominant practice is that we do, right? We do say Baruch Adonai Shalom. And Yaakov Avinu did it. He says, Hamalach HaGoel Hosi Mikora Yavarech Es Hanarim, right? So Yaakov Avinu was talking to the Malach HaGoel, right? So nonetheless, that seems to be the practice. Okay, now next thing, why Eishes Chayil? So Eishes Chayil, most people think is from Tehillim. It's not from Tehillim. It's from the end of Mishlei. It's from Mishlei Lamed Aleph, the 31st and last chapter of Mishlei, where it's a whole description about Lemuel HaMelech, who writes a poem about Eishes Chayil. It seems to be a poem written from a man to his wife about how much he appreciates her. However, and this is about, and so the most basic idea is that, and we'll see this a number of times, is that lots of things happen during the weekday. The week is complicated. Words are said. Words are not said. And it's a complicated time. So the first thing that's said is the husband says, he talks about his wife, and he gives appreciation, because now let's start Shabbos in a way of appreciation. But it could also be on a more Kabbalistic level, that Eishes Chayil is not referring to husband and wife. It refers to the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah is always seen, Hashem's presence is seen as feminine energy, right? Which is why Shekhinah is feminine, right? And so when we talk about Hashem's Shekhinah coming in on Shabbos, there's an abundance of Hashem's expression here. Eishes Chayil is actually the relationship we have to it. So we are speaking to the Shekhinah. Eishes Chayil is referring to Hashem's presence as well. If you read the Malbim on Mishlei, he actually describes it as a conversation between the body and the soul, very interestingly enough, right? So be it as it may, but there's a lot of metaphoric ideas here which also relate to this as well. Which leads us to the next thing. Why is it that there seems to be an almost universal practice to bless children around this time? When I was growing up, my parents used to give me a blessing before I went to sleep on a Friday night. I don't know if anybody has that practice. But most people do it just after Eishes Chayil. So the most basic explanation, which is in the Siddur of the Nahar Shalom, is because mistakes happen during the week. We say untowards words, we make so many complicated, you know what it is, families are families, people are under stress, and things are said. So when we come into Shabbos, we sort of set the scales right again. It's an opportunity to give a bracha, it's an opportunity to bless with peace. So we start off the week in the right way, which is a very beautiful thing. It's sort of a reset, which is so special. However, there's also another reason, and that is the Ma'avoria Abok, in a more Kabbalistic sense, says that brachas are more easily able to be received on a Shabbos because there is a diminishing of the kitrug, of the prosecution of the Satan on Shabbos. So it's the time, if you want to use the time to give brachas on Shabbos. I find it very special when we have grandparents in the house, then I always challenge everybody's how many brachas will be given in this room. Because you have to figure out not just the parents, but also the grandparents to the children and the grandchildren. It's a very beautiful thing. You can get sometimes north of 50 brachas if you have the different branches of the family. It's a very beautiful thing to think about how many brachas are found in one space. Why do parents place their hands on their children's head? Like it's a basic question for the blessing. So the reason is we're duplicating the way we see brachas given in the Torah. So in Parashas Pinchas, when Moshe Rabbeinu gives a bracha to his successor, Yoshua, it says he places his hands on his head. Some people have the practice of placing one hand on the head, and that's as following. Actually, the bracha that Yaakov gives to Menashe and Ephraim, where he takes one hand on each son. Now, you may argue that that's not a great example because there's two sons and two hands, so therefore he has no alternative but to use one hand. But nonetheless, that's why you'll see some parents using one hand based on that biblical paradigm as well. It is worthwhile noting that some people point out that in the hand there happen to be 15 joints. If you ever tried counting them, right? There's 2 on the thumb, and then there's 3 on the other on each of those. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 on the other 4 fingers. That's 15.
14,
and
14.
What was that?
14. Yad.
Oh yes, and thank you. The whole hand itself. There's 14. There's 14. I was doing one extra this, and then there's the actual the wrist itself, the hand, which is so you have 15, and that actually matches the number of words in the Birkas Kohanim, which is what you're giving to your children. Right? There's 15 words. It goes 3, 5, 7. Right, which is in terms of words, it's always going up in 2, right? That's 3, right? So each one of them goes 3, 5, 7. So there's 15 words. So it's actually physically matching the blessing you're giving, which is also worthwhile appreciating this as well. It shouldn't be lost upon us that we evoke Ephraim and Menashe, and it's just that could have been another Bereshis written there was when a grandfather is favoring one son over the other, the switching of the hands. And yet somehow they seem to coexist afterwards. So Yivrach Hashem Yishmerecha, when we say Ephraim and Menashe, is let the children not argue. Right? Let it also be that we're going to give the bracha that the children appreciate their your individual roles. There's no favorites. Yossi.
Isn't there something about if there's a Kohen at the table, or something about using one hand because Kohanim use two hands?
Not familiar. I'm not familiar, but that's very, very possible. It's very possible. I have not heard of that, but I'm learning all the time. Let's go to Kiddush for a second. Why do we do Kiddush? Like, Kiddush literally means to sanctify. You're not sanctifying the day. Right, let's say you say, listen, it's a really busy day today. I'm just going to finish up my work now. I'll do Kiddush later and I'll bring it in. In conservative shuls, Friday night is always 7 o'clock all year round. It's just very convenient, Yeah. It's like, it doesn't work like that. When twilight comes in, and when twilight hits at 4:27, around the November, December times, that's the middle of everything. We just have to drop it somehow, right? So what's this business of the Kiddush? So the reason is because the Torah says, remember the Sabbath to sanctify it, which means Hashem wants us to sanctify it, even though He did it. It's what's called Mekudesh Ma'elov. It's Kvir V'Kaima. It doesn't relate to us. Hashem asks us to sanctify it. It makes so much sense. Ritual is so important for us to do this as well. Shabbos came in, but He wants us to do something about it, and we do it with an act. So we do it Kadshei Al Yain, the Gemara tells us. It's done on wine. Wine is always the bridge between physical and spiritual. The beginning of Shabbos, the end of Shabbos, weddings, brisses, all those times we bring out wine again to make this distinguishing space between the physical and the spiritual. It's fascinating that we do this because, in a certain sense, it empowers us to have our way of relating to Shabbos, of connecting to this. I always say this, I was thinking about this last week. The Yaakov Avinu has this whole fight to the angel, and he walks out, and he's limping, and the whole business. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned from that night, whether it's don't be alone, whether it's the fight for destiny, the fight for the future. There's a lot of important lessons. How do we keep remembering that? The answer is we don't need the sciatic nerve. We need to have some physical expression of that idea for us to remember it, for our children to remember something. An idea is not enough. You need to have it. And by the way, if it's around eating, even better, because people will always remember this. Our meals are an opportunity for ritual ideas, traditions that we create, whether it's our own family traditions or larger traditions that we connect to. One of them is Kiddush, which is our way to do this. Why do some people stand for Kiddush? Why do some people sit for Kiddush? Why do some people not even realize what they're doing? No, that's a separate question. Why do people stand and sit? So actually, there's a number of reasons. The reason for sitting is because you want to create what's called kvios. Kvios means establishment, so that there's a connection between me, you, and the bracha. Usually, I can't say a bracha for you. So, for instance, if I pull out an apple and you have an apple, I'm not really supposed to say the bracha for you, right? I don't say bracha and you answer, because it's what's called a birkas hanehenin, a blessing on benefit. So that's something you don't have to do. So the other person doesn't have to eat the apple, so he doesn't have to eat. Therefore, my bracha can't really cover him. So that's usually the way it works. There are a few times where a person is able to make a bracha for another person. Kiddush is one of them. It's a mix between a birkas hamitzvah and a birkas hanehenin. And as a factor of that, we're supposed to sit down to create a kvios, to make a setting in which I'm allowed to say a bracha for another person. Right? Chabad, everybody says their own Kiddush, but assuming that it's generally one person saying it, that's the way it'll be. However, there's a reason to stand as well, and that is because on a Friday night we say Vayichur Hashemayim va'aretz, which is essentially giving testimony to the creation of the earth, right, of the universe. That being the case, you usually stand when you give testimony. If you go into a court, the witnesses always stand. Still today, that's the case. So therefore, that's the reason why some people stand. Another reason for standing is because it just shows you how important the mitzvah is. So what do we do? How do the cards fall? The Shulchan Aruch says you're supposed to stand. The Ramah says you're supposed to sit. Right? So Sfaradim, generally speaking, stand. Ashkenazim do some form of sitting, standing. Some do a mix. Right? Some people stand for the Vayichur, that's the testimony. They sit for the Kiddush. And that's the way we do it. That's just because of trying to catch both of these things. Where it becomes interesting is, what about Yom Tov? On Yom Tov, there's no Vayichuru. There's no testimony. So then, technically speaking, there should be no standing if you're a purist and only going to the reason of testimony, and then everybody should sit for the Yom Tov Kiddush. Similarly, in the morning, on Shabbos morning, there's no testimony, right? So in that case, it's not about testimony of the heavens and the earth. You're quoting a different paragraph about the Aseret HaDibros, so everybody usually sits in that case, and some people stand because of the specialty of the mitzvah. Why is it people hold Kiddush cups differently? You know, it's like all kinds of different holdings. So generally speaking, you're supposed to have your hands underneath the cup, right? So if it's a flat cup, it sits on the palm of the hand. Our result says the fingers are around it essentially like the petals of a rose. That's the way it's described. Although there is another explanation. There are some who keep it on their fingers. There's another Kabbalistic explanation of that which I don't understand. But the Beis Yosef, Rav Yosef Karo says one should avoid holding it from the sides. That's not seen as a disrespectful way of holding the Kiddush cup. So underneath or on the fingers, but not on the sides. And some people have with the stem. What do? They put the stem between their fingers then, so that it's still on their still supported by their hand. Lots of different practices which are found. Why is there salt on a Shabbos table? Now, sometimes in our house, I have to admit, salt comes after everybody has washed. But that's not the way it's supposed to be, right? And that's not because of anybody else, because it's my job to lay the table. I lay the table on Thursday nights. That's one of my jobs. So I try to do this. But let's say there's no salt, right? It was a really rough Thursday night. So why is there salt on the table? There's a few reasons. One is because the table is seen as a mizbeach, as an altar. That should change the way we talk around our table, right? But nonetheless, so therefore on a table we know that every korban, kol korbanecha takriv melach. You need to have salt on the mizbeach. Another reason is because it reflects a bris melach. It's a notion of this eternal, lasting covenant, and it serves as a reminder at the time when people are silent, and there's sort of an absence of positive talk, that there should be a protection agency for us, which is specifically between washing and eating the bread as well, right? So there's sort of this protection agency which we have as well. Why is it that people make these wordless noises and grunts to each other after they wash? The answer is because the Gemara says that takef l'netila bracha. The Gemara says in brachas that you're supposed to have right after your washing, you're supposed to have a bracha. It's not clear what that means. It could refer to mayim achronim and benching, or it could refer to netilas yadayim and berkas hamotzi. We actually do both, meaning we were careful to make sure there's no gaps in either of those practices. And it's funny because it's not usually that way, right? Meaning usually when do you not make a break? Is between the bracha and the action. But here you have two separate brachas and two separate actions. Meaning there's washing hands and its bracha, there's hamotzi and its bracha. The two aren't necessarily connected. The Gemara tells us they are connected, which is why we try not to speak in such a case. The Yekas used to do it in the way where they used to wash before and do kiddush and then hamotzi. So then this way you'd be set for the whole thing. Generally that's not our practice, right? Generally speaking, we do kiddush, then we wash, and we come back. It should be in a way that it should be somewhat with alacrity, that there's not going to be the cooler station conversations going on while everybody else is sitting there grunting to each other to pass things. But nonetheless, so it's supposed to be that it's meant to focus one so that one is able to move straight into the hamotzi. There's an ancient Chinese saying which is he who washes first speaks least. So but nonetheless, we try to expedite that process. Okay, why are the challahs covered exactly? Like challah covers are great gifts, but why do we need them? So there's actually two reasons for this. One is in the times of the desert when the nation of Israel were receiving the manna was actually not bread. It was actually this it's like the seed-like substance which was ground into flour and then made into bread. Okay, so what happened was they walked out every morning. It was covered the land, and there was a covering of dew across it. The Torah describes it. So you would sort of brush away the dew and then take the seeds, which would be the manna. So when we replicate that on a Shabbos night, where the manna is very much represented in the challah, we cover it like it was covered by the dew. That's what you're thinking of when the challah is covered. Beautiful description, right? There's another reason as well. Technically speaking, in kedima in brachos, there's an order in which you say brachos, all things equal. And there's many different factors in this. There comes, what is the food? Is it full? Is it something you like? Where does it come from? There's a lot of different reasons as to which bracha you should say first. Here's an interesting thing. Is that technically speaking, you're supposed to say hamotzi before you say borei pri hagefen, just in kedima and brachas. So hamotzi comes before the gefen. That's just the law, the order of the law of brachas, which means you're passing over it, because you're doing kiddush because you're supposed to do kiddush al hayayin, right? Which means that you're therefore sidestepping the challah, so you cover it and that's where the notion of the embarrassment of the challah is. That doesn't mean that the challah is getting embarrassed. It means you're sensitive to the fact that you are overlooking a bracha. Michael?
It's covered in the same way that the man was covered. The man came every day. Why don't we cover our bread during the week?
Good question. It's a really good question. I don't know. It's a good question. We really should. It seems to be that on Shabbos particularly, it's more related to the manna, and that's because actually come to the next question is why there are two. Like why there are two breads? Some people actually have more breads, but why are there two breads? It's not a problem to have more. The Vilna Gaon used to have 12, because like the showbread. But why are there challahs, and the reason is because the Torah describes that for 6 days a week people would collect manna, and they would get an omer la gulgoles, so they'd have a certain measure per person, and they would take it home, they'd grind it up, they'd make it into flour, they'd make it into whatever food they're going to have, and that's all good. But on a Shabbos, they would get what the Torah describes as lechem mishneh, which means to say double portion. That's because of one for Friday, one for Shabbos. So we commemorate the manna more on Shabbos when we express that, which might relate to the fact that that's the time where we commemorate that particular practice as well. Why do we slightly cut the challah? So people graze the challah a little bit. So technically speaking, this is actually something you're supposed to do during the week. So coming back to your point, is let's say you're about to eat bread on the weekday. So we didn't in the old days, and the old days is not so long ago. It wasn't like you bought sliced bread from the store. Like you buy bread and you have to cut it up. And like it's nebach, it's like so much effort to eat, right? So what you do is when you say the bracha on a roll or a piece of bread, what you would do is you cut it most of the way so that it's easier to break off or to slice the rest when you say the bracha, right? So you should say the bracha on a shleima, on a full piece, right? But then it should be mostly cut so that you're able to start eating without interruption. That's what should be done. On a Shabbos, it's a little more sensitive because you don't want to cut too deep, because what will happen? Then if it breaks apart on Shabbos, then you'll lose your shleima. So we just put a little bit of a graze to indicate the area. Now it also speaks to the difference in the nature of our bread, by the way, right? So today's bread, I mean, like literally you pick up the one side, the other side falls down. It's got so much sugar, egg, and oil in it, right? But in the old days, that's not how it used to work. In the old days, you could kill somebody who threw a challah at them, right? Which these are really serious pieces of, in fact, there's a family we used to grow up with, used to spend meals with. She made this unbelievable challah. It was baked so hard, they needed a special knife. Like one time, he actually sliced his finger because So that's more like what the challah used to be. Like think more sour bread, right? You know what I'm saying? It's so we have a really thick crust, which is why the beginning cut is actually very helpful to this. It should not be the situation. That's what I've seen sometimes. Sometimes it'll be a nice soft challah, which is beautiful, and the person who's saying that moitzi will make a little thing, and then afterwards will be like examining, where did I put that? It's like, no, the whole point is to expedite the process, not to slow it down, right? So that's where this comes from. But it's actually a difference to the way the weekday works, where the weekday is actually more significant cut as well. Why do we sing at the Shabbos table exactly? Why are we singing? And you should realize that most grown adults in Western society aren't singing at meals, right? They're not. And so the one reason is that actually is a beautiful reason I came across in the Likutei Mariach, who says that when it describes Eov's life, when Eov lost everything, he lost his family, his health, his money, everything he lost, it describes that he was cursed and he had no ability to sing. Beloy Ranana, he had no ability to sing, it describes. This is just the beginning in Perek Daled in Eov. And so when it says, Vayvarech Elokim es yom hashvi, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu blesses the seventh day, how do we express blessing? Is we sing. Singing is, you don't sing if you're not happy, right? And if you're not if you're in a neutral space, by singing you get happier. And I actually was a few years ago, I was invited with Rabbi Axelrod, myself and Rabbi Feigenbaum from IPM at the time, to speak in DRS. And we had all the parents and all the boys, the high schools, on the 25th of December. And it was a program about Shabbos. And before the program, the school had sent out a survey to the kids that was it was anonymous, completely anonymous survey, and it asked lots of different questions. How much do you enjoy Shabbos? How much do you stay in Shabbos clothes? How much do you sing Zmiris at the table? How much do you use your phone on Shabbos? These kind of questions, really, and it was all anonymous. And so we were given the information before we started this conversation. It was really interesting because it was meant to be 3 shareholders: shul, school, parents. Right? Those 3 need to be aligned for education to work. So as we're having this conversation, Rabbi Axelrod made a really great point, and he said, there's a certain percentage of boys who really struggle with Shabbos, and he said, and there was a certain percentage of children who said there were no Zmiris at the Shabbos table to speak of at all, and he said, I wonder if there's a correlation between those 2 groups. And Shabbos is not a joyous thing. If people aren't expressing it, it's just like. Then, and it's not the only indicator. Let's not kid ourselves. But the point is that Judaism is an experience. It's not an intellectual experiment. And sometimes we live in a society which puts wisdom in such supremacy. It's wonderful, but we're not just a thinking race. We're an emotional, social animal. We have to be able to also experience things as well. So that's part of the Zmiros as well. Yeah.
How is the Mavarech able to motzi everybody with the bread if it's a brachas hananim?
It's a really good question. So that's because of the kfiyos. That's only because it's such a special bracha and because of the kfiyos that's created as well. You're right. That's that is, yeah, yes.
Take the chali and throw a piece to everybody.
Yeah. So generally speaking, bread throwing is not encouraged in halacha. No, really, bread is seen as one of the most important foods, which is why the bracha always comes first. And so one's not supposed to throw it, but there is the notion of already having from the bracha, the meal, the bracha, which is why we send it around the table. Why is it that we have such big meals on Shabbos? And you would never eat a meal like that on a Tuesday night, right? Like the salad course, the soup course, the thing, and then 3 desserts. Like you would never eat like that on a regular day. Right? And part of the reason is because of Oneg Shabbos. Oneg Shabbos is enjoying Shabbos, and one of those is expressed in meal. I want to just give you my psychological understanding of what that means. Is, like when describing how to celebrate Yom Tov, the Gemara says there's what's called Chatzi Lashem, Chatzi Lachem, which means half to God and half to you. Right? I firmly believe that the way this works is that Hashem is allowing us to experience joy in the currency that we experience it. Meaning, we are not just intellectual philosophers who sit there, ruminating over the wonder of creation. We are human beings. We like good meat and good wine and stuff, right? So Hashem says, I want you to enjoy my day. I want you to enjoy it on your terms as well. Meaning, I'm giving you the opportunity, and it's Pavlovian. Like, you know how it works. If you're taking the kids or the grandkids on a trip, right, and you want to take them to a really important place, an important museum, where you want to see the heritage of your family, the kids couldn't care less, right? They're like, oh, Mom, Dad, when's this over, right? So what do? You take them to the museum, and then you take them for ice cream right afterwards, right? So then when you ask them, how was the day? They're like, that was a great day, right? And it's not because that you took them to the museum. What you do is you're connecting the experience, meaning whenever you want to do a high-level intellectual experience as part of the vacation, you always put it with a high fructose corn syrup experience too, right? Because you want to make sure that their experience is matching, right? So this is how it works, and we do the same to ourselves. Meaning we're also an animal, we're also a primate, right? We have a soul attached to ourselves, but it's important to realize that, and a lot of the enjoyment is educating ourselves to enjoy it. I once asked the question to a rabbi I once knew. Let's be honest, why do you feel so good on Shabbos? Is it because you just had a great shower, right? You put on your favorite clothing, you got your cologne, you got your perfume. You're feeling good about it. Is that the reason you're feeling good, or is it because of the Shabbos? Shabbos, right? Why are we feeling so good? The answer is a little bit of both. If you were to walk into Shabbos, in your pajamas, you wouldn't be feeling it, right? Now, I'm nothing against pajamas. I can't. My profession just disallows me to. I have to be out here. I know some people just want to get into pajamas when Shabbos comes in. But if you walk in, not in the state of mind or state of being, you're not going to enjoy it in the same way, right? So the point is that we have to have the physical, we'll call apparatus, for us to enjoy it, to educate ourselves to enjoy it, at the same time as the sublime, which is mixing together. It's so important to remember this. This is a crucial part of the equation as well. Why is that we do Shira Malos on Shabbos, like this whole thing, Tehillim 126? So the reason is actually is a reflection of the opposite. It was because there was during the weekday we're supposed to have Al Naharas Bavel. In the weekday, the Zohar tells us you're not supposed to have a meal in which you eat where you don't remember the Beis Hamikdash. Yeah? So that being the case, during the weekday we would say Tehillim Kuf Lamed Zayin 137, which talks about the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. And that's a little bit of a sad thing to say on Shabbos. So instead of Al Naharas Bavel, we put in Shir Amalos, which talks about Shivas Tzina Yinu Kachamim, talk about dreaming about the future redemption, which is a lighter way of talking about the absence of loss. But technically speaking, it's actually a supplant for Al Naharas Bavel. Right, so for those I know one or two people who do it. Al Naharas Bavel, it's a very sad Tehillim in the weekday, but Shir Amalos is really actually the good part of that. Yeah.
Are we supposed to say Al Naharas Bavel every day? We only say said it like just the 9 days.
No, so technically speaking, it's supposed to be every time you have a bread meal. That's the way it's supposed to be, and it's fallen into disuse, and myself included. But I think it's something to aspire to, which is important. Okay, why do some people wash their hands before Birkas Hamazon? Some people do not wash hands. This was called Mayim Achronim, and there was two reasons for this. One is the pasuk says, you should make yourself holy. You should make yourself holy. One is seen as the water before the meal. One is after the meal. Beautiful. Another reason is because of what's called melach sedamis. What is melach sedamis? So if you look in there's very interesting footnotes in the Koren Shas in Sanhedrin Kuf Hey. It describes that there's what's called magnesium chloride, MgCl2, which is a particular type of salt. Salt is just a combination of two ends of the periodic table, right? So the column on the right, the column on the left. So you could we use sodium chloride, NaCl, right? Na2Cl, right? But it could be that you had magnesium as a chloride, and this is found in great abundance in the area of the Dead Sea. Happens to be that it actually is an infectant for eyes, right? So people generally how they eat their meals, they eat their meals with their hands. They dip their bread which did not have all the ingredients we have in it in salt, and they would eat, right? And so then one would have this type of salt on one's fingers. That would be a problem if one touches one's eyes, one finishes the meal, one washes one's hands. We use a safe table salt today. We don't use MgCl. We don't use magnesium chloride, and so that being the case. So that's the reason why some people don't have the practice today. However, there seems to be an independent mitzvah, which is of the Yis Kadashtim, Yisim Kadashtim, of being holy, which is why some people still do it today. Just a note: if you were not to feel comfortable going out to the house with the state of your hands when you go out to like let's say you go to shul and you feel that your hands are sticky and you'd go wash your hands, and you certainly should wash them before you bench, right? I mean that's independent of my machronim. That's just you being in the right state to bench, right? That's not my machronim, but one should certainly be doing this as well. Why do some people use a cup for benching? Like sometimes you'll see a cup, like a cup for benching, some not. So there's a discussion. This is what's called a kos shel bracha. It's a beautiful thing. Everyone should have a kos shel bracha in general. But because it's a debate as to whether this is a requirement or whether this is a mitzvah min hamuvchar, we sequester it only for things that are special. So let's say you have a zimun of 10 as an example. There's 10. Or on a Yom Tov when there's a zimun. So people do it at special times. They'll do a kos shel bracha, but generally speaking, we'll not do it as well. Okay, yeah.
Is for men and women, correct?
Yeah, well, yeah, yes. Is whoever's touching the well, yeah, for sure. I don't know. Sometimes it seems that women don't do it. I don't see any reason why there's any reason not to. What about the nap on Shabbos? Yeah, why is that people nap on Shabbos? Like during the weekday, do you do this? Like in France, they do, right? So. Good. So the Gemara tells us Shana b'Shabbos Tadag. So the Gemara tells us, we obey all these. This is the one halacha that we all obey, right? Is Shana b'Shabbos Tadag.
You could be learning.
So the Meiri points out on that Gemara is that it depends who you are. So meaning to say, the Gemara says, the Gemara says if you really have the kind of week where you're just like it's so busy and so crazy and there's no time for any Torah learning, then Shana b'Shabbos Tadag means to say, then you should be learning. That's shinun, which means learning, like Mishnah, right? But if you're the kind of person who you've put a lot of learning into your week, and your week is saturated with learning of Torah, then Shana means rest. So it just depends. Like you want us to be honest about that as well. But nonetheless, that's also positive. Exactly, and that's a very common practice. What about Kiddush during the day? Why are we doing Kiddush today? We're not bringing in Shabbos, are we? Right? I don't think we're bringing in Kiddush, right? So by bringing in Shabbos, the answer is we're not sanctifying Shabbos, we're sanctifying the meal. That's what's called Kiddush b'makom surah. It makes the meal more special, which is why the Kiddush during the day is really technically only one bracha, Borei Pri HaGefen, not the other Amekadesh Shabbos, which is on Friday night. We have the preamble, but that's not a bracha. That's a paragraph from the Aseret Dibros, and some people have even Toshir b'Shabbos Raglecha if they have the practice of their family. But nonetheless, all it really is a shomru. It's really describing Shabbos and then a bracha, which makes the meal a meal special. And Kiddush b'makom surah is, by the way, according to many, is independent of if you had Kiddush at shul. Which means, let's say you had Kiddush at shul, You can't eat the kiddush. You can't eat after musaf unless you do kiddush. So you do kiddush, right? Or you hear kiddush. Then you eat it. Then you eat. You need to make sure to have a mizana, so you have kiddush b'makom suda at the kiddush. Otherwise, that kiddush is invalidated. Okay, we're good now. We come home, right? Hopefully, there's space which is left for the meal, right? Then you sit down. You should really start doing kiddush again. So you have kiddush b'makom suda, because it's not necessarily about the suda being attached to the wine. It's about the wine being attached to the suda, which is why that is an important thing. We try to do this in our house as well.
What do you make a bracha before Shabbos?
Oh, good question. So why is it no kiddush suda shlishis? Which is the next question. So the reason is because suda shlishis. Well, we can go back a step. Why is there suda shlishis? The reason there's a suda shlishis because the Torah, in describing the manna, describes hayom, hayom, hayom 3 times, and this distinguishes our Shabbos from a weekday. Usually on a weekday we have 2 meals a day, Kellogg's aside, right? So it's supposed to be that we have lunch. And we are supposed to have lunch and supper. That's the healthy way of living one's day. Lunch may be in a little earlier on those days, and supper may be in a little earlier, which is also more healthy in general, but it's usually 2 meals. On Shabbos, we have 3 meals. We have a night, day, and second day meal, which is the third meal, so it distinguishes Shabbos from being special, which is we learn from the manna, the way that the manna is described. However, because the third meal is more, it's an addition, it's an add-on, then what we have at the meal might also be like somewhat more under debate. We're supposed to have bread, but you can also technically, if you can't fit in bread, you can have mizanos. You can't have that. You should have fish and meat. If you can't have that, you have fruit. But the point is that there's multiple options. Being as the meal is less consequential in that respect, therefore kiddush is not added to it. The Rambam says it is, but we don't usually follow the practice of the Rambam of kiddush soda shlishis or as well. Why do we? Yeah. Yes. So lechem mishnah seen all the way through. Lechem mishnah seen as a function all the way through. Yeah.
Friday night, but Shabbos it can be Shahak.
Good question. So in Hasidic circles, this is where it emerged. Being as it's what the day in the day is what's called Kiddush Rabbah. It's Aramaic, which means the great Kiddush. Generally speaking, that's seen as a euphemism. A euphemism means to say it's the one that people forget, right? So it's given a name to emphasize what people forget, because people say, "Oh, I'm bringing in Shabbos, I'll do Kiddush." In the day, less so as well. Then, so the question becomes like this. Let's say wine was not available. Like, if, for instance, in Russia, they didn't have water, so they used vodka, right? So, so it's always... And by the way, vodka was always safer, right? Because it was less contaminated than the water sources, potentially, right? Alcohol is very good with this. So, there's what's called Chamar Medina. Chamar Medina means say a elevated drink which is used in the local region for special occasions, right? Not water, right? But if it's something, so technically speaking, maybe if you don't have Chamar Medina, for Kiddush it doesn't work, but for the Kiddush Rabbah, which is already a Drabanan, then it's seen as supplanting. The question is, what about the shear? Meaning you're supposed to have a revius. Now that would send some men home horizontal, right? So if that's the case, or do you say it has its own shear? No, it's drinking an ounce in ounce units. So then maybe that's better. But generally speaking, it depends on if it is it depends on your practice. People from Germany and Lithuania should not be doing using whiskey for Kiddush Rabbah. People with Hasidic blood can, if that's the practice in their family. But one has to be honest about one's lineage when it comes to this as well. Yeah, Mosh.
Can you also make Kiddush on the challah?
Yes, so technically speaking, if there's no option, Kiddush may be made on challah. This is the kind of questions that happens in Motel 6 on the highway. Right, so, but yes, if that's necessary, one does that. Yeah, Yossi. Day also? No. I believe not in the day, because the Kiddush is there is a Kiddush Rabbah, yeah.
Why is there a revius at night and road coast during the day?
I don't remember. Good question. I don't remember. It is a why question, but I don't remember offhand. A few other questions. Cholent. Why do we need cholent? Why is it almost universal across the spectrum that we need cholent? The reason is because of it's actually because of the opinion of the Karaites. The Mishnah talks about this in introduction to Hilchos Bishul, is that it is much simpler to have a salami sandwich on Shabbos, or just peanut butter and jelly, right? Much easier. No problems, no blechs, no cholents, no putting it on, no half-cooked, none of all the questions that come up. It's running out of water on Friday night, all the questions that come up. It's so much easier. There's no achzara, shehiyah, hatmana, all the questions that come up. And that's what the Karaites believe. They said that you're not allowed to cook on Shabbos, you can't eat hot food. We know we're supposed to enjoy Shabbos. And we're supposed to enjoy Shabbos, and enjoyment is with hot food. There's a completely different meal than a cold meal and a hot meal, right? So we endeavor to do it, and it's an expression of, first of all, enjoyment of Shabbos, and also the fact that we have an oral tradition which tells us there are ways to do this. So we create ways. In fact, I believe that the crock family was a Jewish family here in America who invented the crock pot, right? Because that was how it worked. Slow cookers are very, very helpful when it comes to these kinds of things. Okay, let's close Shabbos quickly because we're at the end of our time. Let's move into Havdalah for a second. Okay, so why do some people sit or stand for Havdalah? I don't know if everybody has different minhagim. So some people stand for Havdalah as a sign of escorting the Shabbos queen. It's a sign of, when your guests are going, you don't sit at the table and say, the door's the third one on the left, enjoy, that's not the way you do it. You stand up, you walk with them, right? So you say same thing with the Shabbos queen. However, with the same question on a Friday night, you want to sit around, and if you want to create kvios for the brachos, you need to have everybody sitting at the same table. Why do we have spices on a Motzei Shabbos? One of the reasons is the Gemara tells us that we have a neshama yasera, we have an enlarged spiritual sense of self on Shabbos, and that dissipates on Motzei Shabbos. As a function of this, people are spiritually sensitive, feel very depressed on Motzei Shabbos. And it's a very sad time, not just because you're not going out with the friends in all the different places and all the FOMO, but actually spiritually that's part of what's happening inside. And as a function of that, one of the most spiritual of the five senses is the sense of smell. So it gives us a little bit of lift at this moment in time where there's dissipation, which is why on a Motzei Yom Tov there's no Besamim. And because there's no Neshama Yisera on a Yom Tov, there's only Neshama Yisera on a Shabbos. Why do we need a candle for Havdalah? This goes back to interesting anthropological development. The Midrash tells us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the wisdom to human beings to discover fire, and that this occurred on a Motzei Shabbos. And so the first time that a human being put two flintstones together and started rubbing, and out emerged the man's red flower. If you're going back to the Jungle Book, then that is on Motzei Shabbos. So we commemorate by creating our own fire. Now, obviously, this is in distinction to Shabbos. We're not allowed to use fire on Shabbos, so we're doing it now, but we're also doing it ourselves from a new flame, as opposed to Yom Kippur, where it's an old flame, because of the creation of fire on a Motzei Shabbos. Why do people raise their hands to the candle? Why are they doing that? So there's a few reasons. One of the reasons is because you're supposed to use the flame. When you're saying brachon, you're supposed to use the flame. So it's very hard to use the flame. So what you do is you use it to see the difference between light and dark. So that's why some people hold their hands like this. They're clapping to see the darkness between their knuckles and the reflection of their nails. That's what you're supposed to do. So you're watching light in that way. Some people do it this way. By the way, I know Rav Goldberg used to always point out, and like this, the hands, all the fingers are different length. When you bring them together, they're all the same length, right? It's interesting that some people do both, but it's to be able to use the light of the candle in order to say the bracha. But this actually is also related to the notion, kabbalistically, of the fingernail. It seems to be that the fingernail was whatever this means, is a description of Adam HaRishon in Gan Eden before the sin was fully like luminescent. And that all, so to speak, disappeared except for the edges of the body, which is where the fingernails are. I mean, like, why do we have nails? It's very good for opening up, hard containers, but like, why specifically, evolutionary-wise, do we develop nails? Are these just, hangovers from, the apes and the trees? But spiritually speaking, this is seen as a place where the last little bit of the glow of the where primordial humanity is found, and we reflect that on this point as well. Which is just coming back to this point is, so when do people raise their hands to the candles? And this comes to an interesting point, is you'll see some people doing it before and some people doing it after. Have you noticed that? The reason is because the bracha itself is a complicated bracha. The baracha aborei ma'arei ha'esh is that what's called a birkas hanehenin or a birkas hashevach. Birkas hanehenin is a blessing of enjoyment. Birkas hashevach is a blessing of praise and thanksgiving. Their brachas actually come at different points. So, for instance, a Birkas HaShevach is always after the experience. I see the lightning, I hear the thunder, I watch the rainbow, I say a bracha after seeing it. When I come to Birkas HaNenin, I say a bracha and I drink the water. I say a bracha and I smell the roses. But so, depending on what this bracha is, and being as it has both elements, that's why some people say they put up their hands and then they say the bracha. Some people say the bracha and then they put up their hands because of those two elements. Some people see you do both. I follow the custom with that Rav Aaron Lichtenstein. One of my friends was learned in Gush, and he told me that Rav Aaron Lichtenstein used to do the following. because you switch hands in Havdalah, right? So you're going to have the kiddush in the right, the cup in the right hand. Then when you get that, you say Borei Peri Hagef and that, you switch it to your left hand so you can pick up the besamim, because you're always supposed to say the bracha with the thing you're about to enjoy in your right hand. So you say the besamim, but the cup's still in the left hand. So what he would do is, he would say the Borei Morei Eish. While you're saying it, he'd have his right hand up to the candles, that's beforehand. Then he'd switch the cup back to his right for the end bracha, and then use his left hand to do this. Just to understand the sensitivities in practice, which were done because of these natures. I think we're going to stop over here. This takes us from Kiddush to Havdalah with a lot in between. I hope this is a meaningful